Cada respirar, cada sussurro, todos os gritos, o riso e o choro, até à última lágrima que corre pelo rosto de todos aqueles que um dia tiveram a sua própria voz, ficam sempre vestígios no vento, e são estes que seguimos. Mas hoje são eles que nos seguem, em direção à luz, e recebemos, mas também encaminhamos todos aqueles que ficaram presos no seu ciclo. Tenha a coragem de desvanecer.
Hello, my dear friends. How is it going? I'm Ari Theriger, and here we are for another episode of the White One series. And I hope you are enjoying these and may it be useful to you in some way. Tell me about it. I need your feedback. Well, on the previous video, I've touched a little bit on some aspects of dream persons, particularly the ancestors. And I've also brought again the case of necromancy, which, without a doubt, it has been highly misunderstood due to the very confusing and derogatory perspective on it from the part of Abrahamic belief systems, which, curiously and funny in a way, despite the criticism from such religious currents, necromancy is also found in such belief systems. Although I must say that specifically Roman Catholicism has had quite a different approach to this and has labeled it necromancy nonetheless, hence the understandable confusion and doubt from the part of the majority of the world's population concerning necromancy. However, when it comes to traditional folk magic, an important part of it is very much a necromantic approach, a necromantic approach to life and nature and the cycles of existence and their modes of life. Every person taking their steps into traditional witchcraft at some point will have to conduct their efforts through a necromantic approach. And it is understandable why many people avoid that route, precisely due to the wrongful and the wrongful bad reputation and misunderstanding, right? But it is a mistake avoiding this. In truth, it is a mistake for the whole of our society to avoid the dead and the ancestors. This evasion from necromancy has had terrible consequences in our society, and I would like to briefly speak of it in this video precisely. Also, I would like to remind you that I have already done a video on the ancestors from the perspective of animism, and if you haven't watched that one yet, I suggest that you do. Some people were understandably surprised concerning the idea that not all ancestors are worthy of honor and to be remembered. There's been quite the romantic perspective on ancestor worship from the part of modern religions and spiritualities. As said before on that video, and other videos and other episodes actually of this series, not all of them, not all of the ancestors are friendly, helpful, or indeed welcomed. Death is, without a doubt, a transformation we are all expected to make to progress within the cycle of existence and relive other modes of life. But death doesn't necessarily change people on certain aspects of their consciousness and behaviors. Some people in life are evil and have done terrible things. As such, in case they become ancestors, it would be a mistake to honor and remember such ancestors, as through the rituals and preservation of memorial fragments through ceremonies, we are perpetuating their vital force and energy, which brings nothing but bad luck and other harmful aspects to life. I do understand the reluctance some people have concerning this reality, accepting this reality, and I also understand why some people don't feel good about remembering and honoring ancestors that were evil to them. And for the latter, I assure you, you are not obliged to dedicate your time to people that brought you nothing good in life. If they were not able to take care of you, to be gentle, kind, friendly in life, they won't do it in death, and you won't get anything good from them. Just because people die, they do not automatically become good or worthy of being remembered. Ancestor worship and rites and rituals towards the ancestors is for the beneficial dead, or towards the beneficial dead, the ones that, through the course of their life and existence among the community of the living and of their descendants, became worthy of being praised, honored, and remembered due to their deeds. In fact, not all those who die become ancestors. But this is something I've already developed or covered in more depth on that other video concerning the ancestors and animism. But this is just a reminder, which I think it is important because, well, today I'm here to touch on the subject of the ancestors once more, as it is an important part of traditional witchcraft. And so, let us begin, if you please. In traditional witchcraft, as we dive in more deeply into the craft, as a result of our relationships with all sorts of entities which aid us in our magical endeavors, at some point it is inevitable to encounter and deal with the spirits of the departed, especially if our craft is generally aided by ancestral entities, and if indeed our tutelary spirits are our own ancestors. This is not something new. We see it in all sorts of animistic societies in which shamanism plays a fundamental role in the spirituality of the communities of persons of all sorts, and we see this in witchcraft, perhaps most especially in hereditary cases, surely, but not just and not only. However, we have been facing a problem which, in my view at least, it is quite dangerous and problematic for all of us. There's been a progressive demonization of practices dealing with the departed throughout the course of our history, as well as a clear degradation of practices and rites towards the ancestors, and a nigh forgetfulness of the departed as persons of this world and of the cycles of life. I would even say an effective propaganda of fear that has led a great portion of our societies to turn their backs on their own ancestors and on the dead. Death became taboo. Death becoming normalized through the wrong perspective, actually, by banalizing it and dehumanizing death, not just through the fear of death and becoming a social taboo, but by the current bombardment of violence modern media throws at us every day, in which the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives has become regular, ordinary, as if it were a standardized pattern of our modern world, with its wars on a massive scale, worldwide, constant natural catastrophes, genocides, more than half of the world's population living below the extreme poverty line, leading to famine and people starving to death, and the destruction of natural habitats, ending the lives of native peoples and native fauna and flora on a colossal extent, the rapid rate we are losing natural environments, and the billions of animals killed every year by the meat industry, 10 times more than the entire population of human beings. The dead are screaming. Billions of souls are not given the proper death and funeral rites, the proper propitiation. They want to reach out, but we turn our backs on them. As such, they seek justice or they seek vengeance. Taking a look at past societies, whether through fear, respect, love, or precaution, the dead were cared for and specific rites, ceremonies, and rituals were conducted so that the departed may find their way and begin their next cycle. Without the proper rite of passage, the proper propitiations, the dead can become vengeful entities. Their energy and vital force can remain attached to a particular place or people, and much harm can come out from the angry dead. When death presents itself as an inevitable transcendence of a person, the great majority of individuals are not ready for it. So it is understandable the states of confusion, unbearable suffering, and anger that follows, both concerning those who stay and those who depart. There is trauma that has to be dealt with in a proper way, and many past societies, and still modern-day animistic and indigenous societies, still hold on to some form of preserved knowledge and rites that help both the departed to move forward, as well as the living, and proper ways to deal with this trauma for the community, precisely by conducting the ceremonies that help persons to move on and continue to move on within their current modes of life. Looking at our bloody history as human beings, we see all sorts of atrocities, wars, genocide, slavery, exploitation, and destruction of land, and so on and so forth. All of these factors leave deep trauma. Ancestral trauma is just as real as generational trauma, which leaves deep marks on our psyche as well as on our own spiritual selves and that of the ancestors. We are what's left of our ancestors walking on this land. Our ancestors are us who walk on other modes of life, carrying on with the cycles of existence. If the dead are silenced, so are we. If the dead suffer, so do we. If the dead cannot move on, so can't we. All of us are formed of ancestral layers that lie deep within ourselves. A great quantity of our existence doesn't come from our own will, but the multiple existences of those who have made us, whose bodies manifest within ours. And as stated in the 5th episode, we have the multiple bodies, many of which are made out of knowledge, experience, and relationships of our ancestors. We forget the dead, we forget ourselves, and we neglect the multiplicity of our existence, and the consequences of that is a sickness within the soul that doesn't properly allow us to fully move forward. I know I have sometimes spoken here about the left-hand path, as I have stated that a good portion of such thoughts and approach to magic are quite useful indeed. However, not just the left-hand path, but other modern occultic branches that preach a similar idea that magic, it's all about our own will and the might and the power to control ourselves. But most of the time, it is not as simple as that, actually. As I said, ancestral trauma is as real as generational trauma. And the deeds and actions of the past are a heavy weight on our own mental and spiritual health. Just because several modern occultic paths tell you that you need a strong will to be an accomplished sorcerer or witch, doesn't mean you are miserably failing when sometimes you lack the will and power and strength. It is normal to feel that way. Things are not as simple as to completely put aside the millions of layers of ancestral existence that are stored within and occasionally come to the surface. By ignoring those who have departed, we ignore the unconscious influence they have upon us. As such, we cannot properly face the problems and even fix them if we don't know where they come from. This is yet another reason why keeping relationships with the beneficial ancestors is a fundamental effort for our healthy growth as persons who belong to the cycle of existence we often call that of the living. Generational trauma, ancestral trauma, also has to be solved from within through our spiritualities as well. Let's call it ancestral curses, for a lack of a better term. We inherit all sorts of things from our ancestors, and that includes the most negative aspects as well. Not all those who depart become ancestors. Not all those who depart can really move forward, and not all the ancestors are beneficial. Some remain attached to the family and are unable to move on, which generally implies a relentless toll upon the descendants. The ancestors can weight us down, and even though our efforts within our craft may be quite successful at times, it could have been a lot better if we understand where the currents of disruption of our power, energy, and vital force that sometimes surface and disturb us really comes from. Of all the things I have given advice in this series, working with the ancestors is fundamental, not only for the craft itself, but for our well-being and the well-being of future generations, but also to try to solve as much as possible ancestral trauma. Ancestor worship has been quite romanticized by modern spiritualities, occultic paths, and esoteric currents. As said before, not all ancestors are good and worthy of our attention, yet they are still there and must be dealt with. I think a fundamental thing to take in mind is that them, just like us and other beings, are persons, subjected to all sorts of influences and changes throughout the cycles of existence and the modes of life we all experience. They, just like us, are not necessarily all good and all wise just because they have died. And certainly, just because they have died, death doesn't necessarily perfect them in any way. As death is a transformation we are all expected to take, we get to continue on experiencing other modes of life, but the wisdom and foolishness of the living can still remain when they become the others, be those ancestors or the departed which exist on different states of existence and consciousness and vital force. Ancestors can lend us all sorts of beneficial effects, but they are not all wise and all powerful. Their limitations are according to their own existential conditions and the experiential knowledge. So the influence they have upon us is not always beneficial, especially if there are ancestors with deep trauma that remain attached to the family, extending the ancestral curses. Just as there are different persons of the living that have different levels of knowledge and potential, power and influence, energy and vital force, the same is applied to the ancestors. They are persons whose transcendence through death led them to an existence on different modes of life, but they are persons nonetheless with their own consciousness, personalities, and individualities, and some can be reluctant to change. The detachment from the dead, from our part from the dead, provoked by our modern societies, has led to a romantic, poetic embellishment of them, creating quite naive perspective of the ancestors, placing them all into the same category of wise beings who lend us all sorts of beneficial things because they still care. There's good less good and evil ancestors. There's wise, less wise, and reckless and senseless ancestors, some of which with no small amount of a very trickster personality. If we take a closer look to animistic societies and indigenous peoples, their sense of ancestors isn't the entirety of all those who were once alive and now have passed into some glorified righteous state of existence. Ancestor worship, veneration, and rituals and rites towards the ancestors, seems to point out to specific persons who are worthy to be remembered and honored due to their skills, powers, tangible actions that have helped the community of persons when they were still among the living, and as such, after their transcendence through death, their memory is kept so they can continue to provide something beneficial. Those are the ones we maintain relationships with. Unfortunately, we don't get to pick our ancestors the same way we don't get to choose those who remain attached to the family and to us. As we are the seeds of our ancestors, we too carry within the less beneficial aspects of their characters. Rites and rituals towards the ancestors is necromancy. And necromancy isn't just and simply this idea to communicate with the dead and help some of them to cross over. Necromancy is also to deal with ancestral trauma, ancestral curse, and the less beneficial or even evil ancestors that remain attached. We can try to help them to evolve, we can try to help them to let go, we can try to learn how to live with their presence. But what I think it is important is to recognize that just because people die, they don't automatically become good or perfected in any way. With that in mind, our efforts are a lot different towards the ancestors if we stop having such naive approaches and romantic views as if we are better than anyone else because of a self-imposed idea that we are descendants of powerful and great people. If ancestors can become our auxiliary entities, we have to keep in mind that their potential and knowledge has limitations. Our craft does not depend on romantic views of what we wish it were the truth. It depends on the realities we deal with. There's persons of all sorts with whom we interact within the craft, and most of them are neither human nor the living ones. We adjust our magical efforts to reach and to each reality and each person that presents itself to us, and also to reach those persons. And I'm not here to teach you what and how to do things or anything. I'm giving you advice. You proceed under what best suits you and under your own knowledge, power, vital force, and the relationships you create with whomever is present to aid you in your craft. As said before, much of witchcraft is about experiential knowledge. Besides, I have my own shit to deal with, so what may work for a person may not work for another, but I think we can all benefit from each other's experiences and advice, right? Another colorful flourishing concerning the ancestors is to think of them as one's own unbesmirched bloodline, free from the vices and faults of humanity, like a line of people of great value and filled with uncorrupted morality. From a Eurocentric point of view of the 19th century, political nationalist thoughts of a collective ancestry of a people painted a pretty picture of strong-minded, brave, steadfast, tenacious ancestors, which are the backbone of the glorious nations of the modern age. Such a romantic conception has spread and entered the spiritual and esoteric scene. People seem to conveniently forget the cruel and vicious ancestors we have had. The murderers, the rapists, the demented and the insane, the slavers, the racists, the tyrants, the oppressors, the hateful, malevolent, and wicked ancestors. We still have those sort of people today in our current society, and they are very much alive. It was no different in the past. As previously said, we don't get to choose our ancestors, our roots, where we come from, and who made us. However, as I said, ancestors that are honored and remembered and called upon in rites and rituals towards them are the ones that have brought beneficial aspects into the community of the living when they were physically part of it. You will encounter ancestors of all sorts, and not all of them are beneficial to your life and to your craft. Many of them have quite distinct preconceived inclinations, tendencies that do not go along with what we hold to be good, right, and true, which is why ancestors are not just the persons of your bloodline, but others that have had great benign and constructive effects upon the communities of the living and upon this world. Many ancestors evoked and very much invoked within ancestor veneration aren't persons that were once directly coming from our own bloodline. In workings dealing with the ancestors, such ancestors should not only consist of our own dead relatives or blood kin, but also of those of other social realities that have greatly contributed for a better life. And also, one way or another, the impact of their actions has directly or indirectly affected your own life in a constructive and favorable way. A living person may not be of your blood kin, but can very well have a tremendous positive impact in your life. And they can continue to do so once they depart, if you so wish it, to continue to maintain and nurture such relationship. Think about those among the dead you can thank and honor for the positive aspects of your current life and the valuable advice and care they have given you, or have given to those whose lives have become much better due to such influence, and as such, their own actions through such positive influence have made a better world and life for you. And my apologies for insisting on this perception, but I believe it to be important, quite important, to keep this in mind, because our approach within the craft towards the ancestors and ancestral work isn't only receiving important knowledge and solely for the benefit of the craft, because it's not just about us. When we work with other persons, we must be careful to avoid things becoming solely about us and avoid presenting ourselves as selfish, self-centered, narcissistic even, and we may not even be like that, obviously, but in our eagerness to acquire magical power and knowledge, sometimes we forget we are dealing with other persons as well, and their own wisdom and advice is fundamental. Much of necromancy is also about healing the departed as much as it is possible and trying to correctly appease the departed, as many are stuck and cannot develop and carry on within the cycle of life due to whatever they deem to be traumatic enough to remain. And much of it has to do with guilt, remorse, shame, anger. As I said before, there's numerous layers of ancestors and they slowly reveal themselves to you, but many of them remained attached due to quite the negative aspects of their own existence, and as such, it has quite the negative impact on you, preventing you from moving forward in a smoother way. It is important working on the ancestors that clearly cannot move on, because as you appease them and work through the trauma, other ancestors will eventually appear. Think of it as actual layers or pages of a book dealing with the ancestors. You want to move on and turn the pages until the powerful and wise ancestors appear. You are looking for them, but first you need to take care of the other layers that are closer to the surface. The way you present yourself to the ancestors and the work you do is a way to reveal yourself to them, show the type of person that you are, and eventually they will get to know you and reveal themselves to you. Persons are attached to other particular persons, so in order to show yourself, present yourself, make yourself be known, you need to work through those layers of persons. This is important because eventually you will find someone like you that has passed through similar struggles, but has also passed through the same aspirations, wishes, hopes, and dreams, and they too have had a hand on magic, and their advice is of the utmost importance. Because what the dead regret not having done, or having done, will reflect upon you, because through you, they want to somehow redeem themselves through your own life. Your life can be turned around into their life. And through you, they try to reclaim or restore something. You must turn this around and be perfectly clear on your boundaries. Separate things and help them out to sort their own issues. You are not working for them, they are not working for you. It must be built a relationship of mutual respect where all can benefit from it. These are the first steps in necromancy to properly relate to the dead. You are dealing with trauma, so you too can someday properly make the transition, getting rid of self-imposed and circumstantial and social religious limitations. Transitioning with a lighter consciousness, as someday you can very well become someone's ancestor, and doesn't necessarily mean to advise and help bloodkin, but you too can help other ancestors upon transition. The cycle of healing continues beyond transition, and those who return can return a lot better if the cycle of healing properly works. If you remember my video concerning going over the hedge and the idea I've tried to pass on of becoming the other by leaving behind the illusionary sense of what makes us human, abandoning labels, religious dogmas, abandoning a sense of belonging, which is usually through the lens of agreed upon falsehoods that eventually make the truth, and the perceptions of identity through collectively accepted social and religious norms and whatnot. Well, when it comes to witchcraft, it is fundamental to go over the hedge in a complete abandonment of self-imposed and very much socially and theologically imposed identities of the self in order to become the other, to be the non-human, or rather to be anything but human, so we might better engage with the persons that are not human. This is an attempt to leave behind the biases brought by a human mentality exposed to the human world, as an effort to be more inserted in the environments where the persons we are trying to create a relationship with to aid in our craft live and exist, facilitating the engagement with them. And what better persons to help us in this shift of mentality and perception if not the ones that were once like us, living human beings which, through the transcendence of death, of the denser form, have become something else other than human persons. Unfortunately, but understandably, most of us, I would even risk it, the great majority of us, we have the tendency to live life by someone else's patterns and what they expect of us, as well as the tendency to please others, to be accepted, to be cherished, to show our worth. And this leads us to have quite a lot of limitations when it comes to living life. We are bound to all sorts of labels and stipulated rightful behaviors and conduct since an early age. Our upbringing is full of imposed and preconceived ideas. The dead, the once living human persons, have become something else upon transcendence, but they know all types of imposed ideas and labels they had to endure and live with. They know the pressure, restraint, how they had to mask themselves, to cover and hide who they were in order to survive whatever normality was imposed on them by family, friends, society, religion, the world. Whatever important aspects of their own identity they had to give up in order to survive or to please others. They know, they have been through that, and upon death, one comes to the realization that nothing of that is worth losing who we truly are. So the dead can help the living on how to let go of all of those constraints. If we think about the main thing the dead want to communicate with us, it starts to make a little bit more sense, I believe. They want to tell us their stories, right? And their stories help us to understand the illusions of our societies and the futility of becoming what we are not just to please others. Renouncing our true selves, our true identities for the sake of survival. And indeed, it may be a question of survival and there's no other way, but survival is not living. And so we wither, decay, and fade away. We die before we die. The stories of the dead help us to let go of the chains of social and religious perceptions and conceptions, so we may embrace our nature and live a better life. By becoming ourselves, we can better conduct anything in our life towards a better outcome, and that very much includes our efforts within the craft. We need to let go, or we end up like the dead that cannot move forward and complete their cycle. As many stay stuck due to the words that were never spoken in life and the deeds that were never done. As I told you before, the dead have plenty to tell, and when they start speaking, they will never shut up. Their stories, the things left unsaid and undone, are the most frequent things they request of you. They want to be heard so that they can move on. By letting go of the things that prevent us from living, we can pass on more easily to become ancestors. The work with the dead, and also with those of your bloodline, most especially, can be terrible, can be brutal, but it is liberating. And as I also told you before on some other video, and I quote myself, I have that privilege, witchcraft is not meant to be comfortable, it's meant to be liberating. This is part of the work, to listen to the stories and to let go. Just the same way we inherit all sorts of hereditary diseases, physical aspects we might not appreciate, things that constitute our physical selves that were not our choice, and it is unfair and even cruel at times. We also inherit a great deal of the heavy, gloomy, and uncomfortable energy of our ancestors' misdeeds. It's not our fault. We didn't do the things they did, but it is there with us. It looms on us, on our souls, on our hearts. We certainly cannot be blamed, and we cannot blame ourselves for what our ancestors have done. However, we inherit those factors, and it has a heavy weight on us. So when we communicate with the ancestors, we get to know terrible things they have done. And we must work on that. That's when the healing takes place, facing the uncomfortable truth. The stories of the ancestors also help us to avoid committing the same mistakes, even the same crimes, to prevent our descendants from having to pass through the same thing, the same heavy weight on their shoulders they will have to deal with when they contact their past ancestors. Free them from such a burden by freeing yourself from the burdens you have inherited. Necromancy is also preparing a better future for those who come next, and a better passing for yourself when you become someone's ancestor. Or in other words, concerning this last part, if you are to become an ancestor indeed, you have to start this work as soon as possible. So, you see, it's not that easy to deal with magic as some occultic modern paths leads us and lead you to believe. Surely, it is good to trust yourself and to have a sort of speech that motivates you, that makes you more self-confident, self-assured. Surely. However, it can be frustrating when there's so much talk about relying on our power, might, and strength to have a strong will, when a lot of aspects of our life do not depend solely on our own power, might, and strength. We have to work on the more negative aspects of life and of the spirit that we have inherited due to ancestors' mistakes, misdeeds, and crimes. And that's our true power, might, and strength, to face the uncomfortable truth and start the process of healing and moving forward and better conduct our craft when our spirit is at peace. Own it. Your life is your own, your body is your own, and so is your spirit. The adversities of life and of inheritance are not of your making, but you can choose the way in which you face them and deal with them. Under the best possible way, you manage to control your life, your body, and your spirit. Do not be ashamed of feeling scared or to fail sometimes. Face the uncomfortable truth. And that is more than what most people can do or handle. The only thing we can all do is our best, our very best. And we work with what we have. If we have to keep on returning to this cycle of existence, so be it. But each step towards personal evolution is already a step towards a gentler and a serene state of existence, hopefully. Besides, you haven't inherited only the bad aspects, as there's much goodness and wisdom in you as well. It's up to you to at least try to break ancestral curses. Your choices and actions can either perpetuate them, or through you, finally, the healing can begin. And it's that effort, that effort is an important aspect of you that will be appreciated by those who come next, and they shall seek you out for wisdom and advice to continue the healing. And through them, as an ancestor now, you can continue the healing as well. Indeed, we are all connected on more layers we can possibly imagine or know. The deeper we delve, the more we know, and the clearer the path to take presents itself to us. When we perceive, understand, accept, and work on the darkest aspects of our ancestors and the awful things they have done, this helps us to let go of a whimsical sense of pride that can greatly disturb our approach to magic. We often hear the talk about working on our ego to be humble but determined, avoid feeding our ego with self-pride, self-admiration, right? By working on the more negative aspects of our ancestors, this helps us to be more modest, respectful, even more diplomatic, I think, as we tend to focus much more on the great achievements of the side of the family we deem to be good, right, and just, and we recoil and shake off the accounts of the bad and the evil ancestors, which to us become the unacceptable ancestors. Naturally, there's a sense of pride. It's good and proper to have pride of the achievements of our ancestors. Of course it is. However, let us not be prideful to the point of thinking that we have any right to do something or right and power over others, or even that we are special or have some birthright just because some of our ancestors did something good. The great achievements of our ancestors are their own. It doesn't make us good, exceptional, and it doesn't give us any value to us as individuals, because their achievements are not our achievements. This is not like the great artists of old who have died in misery, but it is their descendants that get all the credit and the money for something they haven't done, and for the imagination, creativeness, and struggles they don't have and didn't pass through. It is good and proper to be proud of the good things our ancestors did, and they are a good example to follow. But pride isn't the force that must drive us on, or soon we will live in a complete illusion of a self-made and completely fictional self-aggrandizement. It's very good for our growth as individuals and in our magical endeavors, to be face to face with the more adverse and conflicting past realities of our ancestors. That's something that humbles us, I think. We can be great persons if we face reality and work on becoming better people than our ancestors ever were. If we choose to live in the shadow of others' great deeds and build for ourselves a fantasy where we are the main special character feeding on the achievements that weren't ours, there's little personal evolution, if any at all. The darker and most uncomfortable stories of our ancestors humbles us. That humbleness is like starting from scratch and going ever up, building ourselves again to become better persons and someday become beneficial ancestors, worthy to be remembered, honored, and called upon. But another positive aspect of finding out about the misdeeds of our ancestors is precisely desire and motivation to go look for the ancestors that are not from our bloodline. And we end up finding wonderful and powerful other than human persons that can greatly aid us and are willing to do so, which is important. Remember what I have said on a previous episode, to construct an environment in your space where you work magic with elements that help to invite spirit entities to aid you and to begin to build a relationship with them closer to your own personal reality, right? Bringing in materials that are more familiar to them to make them feel comfortable and welcome. With the ancestors is the same thing. The more you know about them, the easier it will be to set up an environment for them with the things they like and are more familiar with. To welcome them at your own private life is very important. These environments for the ancestors you feel more connected with, of course, and whose stories are elemental to your well-being and that of your craft, are crucial to begin to set up methods of communication. As soon as you have done the work of getting to know them and which ones you really want to build, establish or re-establish a relationship with, you start to invite them into your life and then start to work on methods of communication. The things you bring to your private space to create a welcoming environment for the ancestors aren't just your tools, but also their tools, with which they will also establish communication with you. And I suggest you have at least 2 different places or spots or even altars for the ancestors and for other spirits you have a relationship with and work with. Different persons like to feel comfortable in their own environment, or rather, in places where they feel comfortable and welcomed. And it's important to set up boundaries, as it is also a sign of respect, respecting their own conditions and feelings, their way of being and the tools they prefer to work with. We don't want different other than human persons messing around with things, as this may create conflict between persons and the feeling of not being respected or even welcomed in there. And so they leave and move on. The same spot you have for a particular spirit entity of the house, say some spirit that is particularly beneficial for the plants you have, and so you maintain this spirit in that spot through specific offerings. That spot cannot be the same for other spirits that bring something beneficial to your life. Invite them, make them feel at home, respect them, but be decisive on the boundaries. Again, the environments you create with the things that are familiar and pleasant to the spirits you want to bring in is precisely to create a little home for them within your own home or the space in which you inhabit, exist, and work on your magic. Let's picture this as if it were a plant you have at home. In order for it to thrive and give you something beneficial, You cannot let the plant be near your cats or they will bother it, eat it most likely. But you cannot prevent your cats from having their own space to exist and play and eat and sleep. And you must be careful that they too won't go around messing with the old spider at the corner of the room, which eats pests by catching them in its web. So set up boundaries, but make them feel safe and welcome. Make them feel at home so they can continue to thrive and give to your life something beneficial. There are different ways to communicate with each in their own spaces of existence. A spider just wants to be left alone, but feels safe. Cats want to play around, have their own toys, their place for water and food, and places to sleep. The plant wants a place where it can enjoy the sun and needs water and also soothing words. The same thing happens with the spirit entities you invite into your home. This is not to say that both the living persons and the spirit persons in your home won't eventually interact. They may do so, but let them make that choice within the boundaries that you have set up. Let them make that choice when they feel welcome. When they feel welcome, comfortable, and ready to take steps towards a more involved participation in your life and the life and existence of others within this space. The objects, the elements you have to create a space for the ancestors, such elements being the ones you know they enjoy and are more familiar with, are all kept in a space for them. It is the concept of the altar or the shrine. It's a little spot devoted to particular spirits, and we don't mix their things. You won't be taking baths in the kitchen and cook in the bedroom, right? Just as a house has specific places for each function and day-to-day activity, the spirits that you invite in also must feel an orderly ambience where each space has its function. This is vital for your craft because different spirit entities have different ways of communication. And you, yourself, each one of us have different methods of communication with different types of persons. So all these elements for each spirit entity become unique tools to establish different methods of communication. You will start to pick up the communication from the tool that is being used because it progressively becomes the tool of a specific spirit entity. And then you will know which one spirit entity is trying to communicate and what they are trying to communicate. Some tools are yours, others are of them or for them. Each tool gets a new owner, and this helps to know who is using which tool and what they want to communicate, precisely based on each tool. You will recognize this due to the boundaries you have created, the spaces, the altars, shrines, etc., and the specific tools on each of them. It's like a catalog, a list. You keep track of the spirit entities based on the space at home and the specific tools at their disposal in each particular space. Yes, and speaking of this, it came to mind, you know the types of offerings to the ancestors, such as a meal you divide with them at the table, but also there's meals or particular types of foods you also offer to domestic spirits and others, right? Well, there it is. Another reason why it is so important to set up boundaries and particular spaces for each spirit entity. The offering you make to some may be confusing to others. If you place a cup of vodka for a vette, some house spirit like an elf, a fairy, or some of the little folk, it is dangerous to place such an offering in the same spot you put similar offerings to others. It's good to keep these things in order. It may anger them if their offering is robbed by another, or if they mistake an offering to another for themselves. You don't water the cats and give a can of cat food to a plant. You don't actively put cat food on the same space where the plant exists and don't expect the cats to go in there to eat the food that is for them and bring total chaos to that environment and destroy the plant. The chair where a specific ancestor sits isn't the same for another ancestor. The bowl of some drinkable substance for your house elf isn't the same and in the same spot where you give a drinkable offering to the passing little folk or where the trickster goblin dwells, right? You don't want to turn your house into a complete mess, totally chaotic, and rapidly lose control of your own life and your own craft. It's no coincidence folk tales have the same pattern of keeping the house clean and tight to avoid angering the spirits of the house. It's also no coincidence that many folk tales or folklore stories tell us of the specific spaces of the house for each ancestor, and the more comfortable the place is, say near the hearth, the better the ancestor feels, and obviously more respected and happy. As such, the likely it will help you out and bring something beneficial to your life. Besides, not every meal you place for an ancestor, and by meal it can literally be a meal or an empty plate. Well, the important thing to take into consideration is that when you either place a meal as offering or an empty place and leave a seat open at your table, it is an invitation. And not every invitation will be accepted by the same ancestor. It can occur that, because it is an invitation to the ancestors, some ancestors might accept the invitation. As such, there are some unexpected ancestors that come to aid you. There are ancestors that choose to step forward and may not be the ones you expected. So it is my advice, take it or leave it, to not only have a specific place for the ancestors so they know that's the place where they are being invited in and where they can express themselves to avoid stepping into other areas where they will maybe feel uncomfortable and unwelcomed, but also when you want to invite specific ancestors, especially the people you have met in life and they are now among the departed, the invitation should have items, elements that either belong to them or things they enjoyed in life and are familiar with. Say, a glass of wine they specifically enjoyed, the chair they used to sit on, the meal they used to cook for you or the meal you both cook together, or that specific cake you know they love so much. You get the point. And you nod in confirmation because you know and you do this, especially the connection with the wine. So this has been the whole process from getting to know the ancestors, finding out with which ones you want to establish a relationship with, starting the healing process of ancestral curses, so you and your ancestors and the ancestors can progressively have a smoother progression within the cyclical existence, establishing boundaries, the spaces for them and others, setting up the tools, and from there you develop everything else. You are creating a space that will also help you to deal with other spirit entities and others of the dead and other types of ancestors that will knock on your door and ask something of you, because once you let yourself be known to them, this will pull a lot more of them to you, because they want to be heard, they want to tell their stories. And as said before, some can be quite persistent and want to express themselves and do and speak all the things left undone and unsaid in life by attaching themselves to your life and using you to let go of all of that accumulated energy. As such, it is a defensive mechanism of yours to set up a space where not only you have boundaries, but also you have the aid of those you know you can count on, and together deal with whatever adversities and persons that may come your way. To finalize today's episode, and I promise you I won't take much more of your time, there's something interesting about the ancestral dead, and other departed persons when you come in contact with them and you get to dig through the crowd, so to speak, to form a more concrete contact with some of them in order to create the group of ancestral entities that can aid you and are willing to do so. The ancestral dead have some limitations, some of them quite the profound limitations. There's been that very beautiful idea that the ancestral dead are quite wise, and I'm not certainly denying that some are indeed wise, very wise, and there's much they can teach us, obviously. However, just as a person doesn't become any better or perfected solely through the transcendence of death, doesn't automatically become any wiser either. Many ancestral dead persons have their limitations on knowledge and a whole variety of factors in different modes of life. Necromancy also becomes quite helpful for such departed persons, as we can show them and teach them things they don't know. And this helps them to move on and to evolve, as much as it helps us in the learning process to be more knowledgeable in ways to heal the departed and ourselves. There are several skills many of the departed don't yet know, and a great deal of them don't seem to either learn anything new through their condition, nor from other ancestral dead who are wiser than them. Some of the departed are quite reluctant and often remain attached to a specific way of thinking and perception and even behavioral patterns they had while they belonged to the community of the living. Showing them new things, new ways of perceiving things, helps them to find out about new ways of manifesting and expressing themselves in their current condition. Because of the very sharp limitations society imposes on people, on all of us, there's often a repression of people's potential and a disbelief on our capacities as individuals. Those sort of limitations often remain in the consciousness of the departed, especially the recent dead. Each state of existence in each mode of life gives us many possibilities, but we may not perceive them, or we cannot even proceed to try anything new because we often get so accustomed to a limited version of life in order to survive it, that we just carry on living that sort of life and transporting that mentality into other modes of life. So part of necromancy is also to teach the departed and help them to unlock new skills under their current condition of existence. The way you engage with these types of departed persons opens up new possibilities for both the departed and for you, because some ancestral spirits may not be immediately predisposed to work with you, even if they already know about you. By helping the departed, you show potential. As such, you open up possibilities for yourself to work with other ancestors and even have them accept your invitations or being visited by some when they finally decide you are worth engaging with due to the work you are doing. You start to be respected and appreciated by them. As such, they will progressively approach you. If you show potential, they will want to engage with you, so you can also help them out, or even give you advice so you can perfect your methods and be more successful in the ways you help them. It's reciprocal. Remember, if these are directly your ancestors, their well-being is intimately tied with yours. Those who refuse to change due to their perspectives or even trauma won't contribute with anything constructive in the chain of ancestry. You help yourself by helping them. Well then, my dear friends, once again, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again.